Everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, and I'm Eve Engler coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And this Canadian Foreign Policy Hour is a critical look at Canada's role abroad. We've been doing this for about 100 and I think 130, 135 weeks. And this week we have actually, I think, quite a dangerous mix of escalation and suppression on the NATO proxy war that I'll get into, and lots of other developments. The first thing, um, there's some movie documentary called "Forsaken Warriors: How Trudeau Broke Canada's Military," which apparently was just released yesterday. I haven't had a chance to see it, but apparently we need to be giving a lot more money to the military, according to these people, and we have to drop the wokeify attempts to wokeify military culture have left many frustrated and headed for the doors. Um, so we got to give a bunch more money, and we have to stop complaining about women being raped. That's let's be clear. That's what the main or sexual assault, I guess, maybe a bit of slightly broader category, but that's the main issue. That's the wokeifying is complaining about. Burkina Faso apparently nationalized a couple gold mines. I think they're UK mines. I haven't seen much about it. I saw one story in some left publication. Haven't had a chance to really like delve into it. But Canada is, I think, his biggest miner in Burkina Faso. So I'm very confident that the Canadian government is nervous, and the Canadian mining industry, or more, that the Canadian mining industry is quite nervous, and the Canadian government is probably engaged in the background to try to deter any nationalization of Canadian companies. In the Dominican, there's a big protest from families, 450 families that live close to the Barrick Gold part-owned Pueblo Viejo mine, huge mine that's really disrupted their environment, ecosystem. And they marched over 100 kilometers to Santo Domingo, to the capital, to complain about Barrick Gold's co-owned Pueblo Viejo mine. And there was a report about the number of people killed around the world resisting mining. I think it was 18 killed in Mexico, something similar in Honduras, I think last year, quite a few in Colombia. Environmental activists basically who are being killed because they're opposing mine. And of course, I don't know the breakdown of how many of those are because of Canadian run mines, but I guarantee you there's many. And of course, Canadian companies are global powerhouse around the world. The Miami Herald had a piece about Canada UN step up calls for Haiti assistance as Jamaican security personnel head down. So the Canadian trained Jamaican forces trained to go to Haiti. They departed, I guess, about a week ago now, and the Canadian government's pushing for a greater foreign role in Haiti. We know that, of course, but they are picking the pace up on that, according to the Miami Herald. Bob Ray was down there, and Canada's ambassador to the UN, and is really pushing the issue. Now, the whole Haiti issue has obviously become a huge media uh, item because of what's going on in Springfield, Ohio, where where apparently it's not actually funny because it's led to all kinds of really horrible things against the people. But their claim is the Haitian immigrants have been they've whipped up a storm about Haitian immigrants apparently claim to eating pets. It's hard to watch this stuff and just be that people take this seriously, but they do clearly. And it's whipped up a huge storm where you have Donald Trump talking about it in the debate. You had JD Vance tweeting out about it very explicitly. It's a total fabrication. The evidence that they've tried to sort of uh, post facto kind of bring up, there's the one image of a black person carrying a goose or something like that. It's not even from Springfield, and the person's not Haitian. It's from some other town in Ohio, like 60 miles away or something like that. And it's just this is I think there's all kinds of elements to it. This part of this, of course, is just the Republican right, anti-immigrant stuff, whipping up that. Part of it, of course, is anti-black racism within the U.S., but part of it is also a particular anti-Haitianism. And the Canadian government and Canadian political culture has participated in that anti-Haitianism. The One of the more infamous ones is, of course, the whole Haitians being responsible for HIV/AIDS in the early 1980s. The Canadian government, Canadian pamphlets that were like handed out in malls claimed that Haitians were responsible for HIV/AIDS. You have So there was a whole Canada kind of echoed what the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in the U.S., did to Haitians. The four H's, which was I guess hemophiliacs, homosexuals, something, and Haitians, that got pushed. There's the whole business after the terrible 2010 earthquake, where these Protestant evangelicals said it was because of Bois-Camon, I think would be the French pronunciation of the voodoo ceremony in August of 1791, where it's sort of like the organizing that leads to the Haitian Revolution. And so the claim is that it was like a pact with the devil. That's how infamously Pat Robertson, the far, hard right evangelical Christian in the U.S. But you have that among Protestant churches in Canada. This whole business of Haiti's is being punished by God for its pact with the devil, and they cite Robertson very explicitly cited the voodoo ceremony, the organizing ceremony that launched the Haitian revolution. And this anti-Haitianism, I wrote this piece that kind of just some stuff I have in my book about that I have yet to publish about Canada's role in Haiti historically. But this goes back, of course, to the Haitian Revolution, and it was such a earth-shattering, world-shattering event that just upended the order of things. It was so far ahead of its time in terms of equality, racial equality, most specifically, that it was, there was just a whole demonization of Haiti that took place with thousands of books and articles and photographs and all this stuff about the sort of barbaric Haitians during and after the Haitian Revolution, even though, of course, there was, about 5 times more Africans that were killed than there were whites that were killed. And obviously, they had every right, moral right, that's for sure, to violently resist the most barbaric of the slave enslavement systems in the hemisphere. Really, that's what the Saint-Domingue was. It was the most racialized and brutal plantation economy, and so the Haitian Revolution, came out of that, and it was, of course, very violent, but it was a violent response to this incredible violence that the Africans were put under. And so this what we're seeing today, I think, has its kind of like its connection to that. There's an interesting element on Haitian anti-Haitianism, which is rampant. It's not. There's an anti-Haitianism is anti-blackness, but it's not only anti-blackness. It's anti-Haitianism is rampant in the Dominican Republic. It's where much of the population is black, though it's a very racist society. It's in other Caribbean countries. There's this whole the big anti-Haitian kind of stuff in Guyana popped up a few years ago, and they repeat this whole Haitians, AIDS, same thing. And I talk about this in the article. There's Canadian examples of that in more recent years, Canadian radio and stuff like that, that still kind of push out that kind of line. Um, so anti-Haitianism is it's rampant. It's quite powerful in some contexts, most obviously in Dominican Republic. And there's a few elements to it, I think, that are worth kind of like unpackaging. One element, it's not an important part of it. Mostly it's about imperialism. Mostly it's about weakness. But there is a linguistic. Haiti's linguistic isolation exacerbates some of the problem, right? Because it doesn't speak Spanish. And to the extent that there is an outside language that they speak, it's French, which is really kind of removed from the region. Creole Haitian, or Haitian really is what it should be called, is obviously it's just people in Haiti that speak it. So Haiti gets isolated from Latin American left because it doesn't speak Spanish, right? So Latin American left can interact more with the Dominican Republic because of the linguistic thing. So that just further contributes to anti-Haitianism and the weakness. But of course, the main issue is Haiti's weakness, and that's why this kind of stuff can pop up. And it's kind of it's easy to laugh at these Republican crazies that are whipped up about eating pets and all this kind of business. But the truth is that this kind of anti-Haitianism, it appears on the pages of the Globe and Mail and liberal publications all the time, right? Where they call for foreign intervention as if there wasn't just a UN mission that it was just in Haiti that didn't, right? So this anti-Haitianism has its crass and I would say unsophisticated version in the J.D. Vance Donald Trump version, but then it also has its more sophisticated, learned, liberal, intellectual, whatever that you see on the pages of the Globe Mail, which we have talked about many times in the past. Jemima Pierre, Haitian U.S. now I think based in Vancouver, academic, I think kind of did a good little kind of summary. She said, "We're all watching a live genocide of white savagery against Palestinians, but it's Haitian people once again that are called savages." And I think that there's a whole lot of truth in that, and a certainly way of framing this whole issue that is worthwhile to consider. On a different issue, there was a big long piece in the CBC about how the victims, families of the downing of flight PS 752, which of course was the flight where there was dozens and dozens of Iranian Canadians who were blown up in the sky in Tehran or outside of Tehran. And basically they're suing the RCMP because the RCMP is not willing to launch this probe into it. And the Ukrainians, the flight was going, I guess, to Kiev, from Tehran to Kiev. And so the Ukrainians have been in charge of the file and the sort of criminal investigation. But of course, it's different, it's not a priority right now for the Ukrainian government with the war. And so the issue's kind of been left to the side. And this big long piece in the CBC, it must have been at least 1,000 words, maybe 1,500, quite an extensive piece. And in it, and we see this with time. Now, the whole context is just gone. It's just Iran blew this plane up out of the sky. What happened a few days before, where the Americans blew up General Soleimani in Iraq in this incredible violation of international law, incredibly escalatory dynamic, and this whole context, it's just now it's not even part of the story. And you've seen it with time, how it just gets moved and moved and moved. And then now it's just like one day the Iranians decide to blow up a plane out of the sky. And, it's anywhere from a mix of, they're trying to say it's like criminal act. I think pretty clearly it was a mistake, but it's a mistake in a context, a political context the U.S. is principally responsible for. But they're just now they're trying to frame it as just an intended Iranian move. But it's really remarkable to see that process kind of play out over the years, and it's all, of course, part of this demonization of Iran. Iran's the big enemy. Richard Fadden, the ex-director of CSIS, and a number of top former Canadian security defense officials I probably are now. They were this report on a few days ago in the Globe, are on a trip to Taiwan that was going to leave in a few days, and it's all part of deepening informal relations with Taiwan. So this is the Canadian government's way of not really, they're not technically responsible. This is a former officials, but there's very unlikely that they would have done this without a sort of prodding from Ottawa. And this is the sort of diplomatic game going on with the Chinese over Taiwan and isolation and developing further ties with Taiwan and kind of ending Canada's one China policy, but not formally ending it and playing that kind of diplomatic game, which the Americans, of course, are doing a lot of as well. And so today in the Globe, the foreign interference inquiry is back up and running. And the Globe, they couldn't leave, possibly not announce this in the biggest forum possible. So on the front, they mentioned the restarting of the foreign interference, and then they gave it big 2 pages to it's Stephen Chase and Bob Fice again, as always. Big 2 pages to just sort of recap what's been talked about at the foreign interference. So I read it. I'm now at this point, quite honestly, I've wasted a lot of time in my life reading these foreign interference stories because they come up with nothing, right? It's like they just repeat the same stuff. Like the big issue is the buses, right? The Handongs busing foreign interference for Chinese students, international students into the nomination race in his riding and getting nominated as Liberal candidate. That's like the big one. And then of course the issue of the other one that's talked about is the WeChat and the conservative candidate out in Richmond that says he was defeated because the Chinese Canadian community in Richmond turned against the conservatives because they saw this sort of whipping up of anti-China kind of sentiment. And apparently it's all through WeChat, and maybe the Chinese government was in some way involved, or maybe they weren't. Maybe it was just, stories kind of flowing in the ecosystem of a Chinese social media. I don't really know. I'm kind of prepared to believe there's some of, either way on that. But in the big scheme of things, it's pretty insignificant, right? It was a close race. It was going to be a close race. He did push a anti-China line, and the Chinese community stopped voting for him. I don't like that's the essence of it. Whether the Chinese government is a source of power that strengthens the hand of the Chinese Canadian community in voting that way, I'm totally prepared to believe that Chinese government is a source of power, obviously in a general sense, but even in a direct sense of that there is WeChat is a Chinese social media company and it's got, its biases towards the Chinese government perspective, whatever. That I'm also, prepared to believe. I haven't really seen the evidence that it's some sort of really deep interference, but where is that line of interference is a complicated one. But nonetheless, even if you believed it was a deep interference, it's pretty minimal in the context of things. And so, anyways, we rehashed that in the Globe. Now, one of the things that was interesting, and I think important, that made it worth reading this whole big 2-page spread in the Globe, was that Jean-Pierre Kingsley. Okay, he's the former head of Elections Canada. Now, Jean-Pierre Kingsley, I'm not going to get into it all, but Jean-Pierre Kingsley played this really, really nefarious role in the election in Haiti in 2006. Okay, he headed up the electoral oversight body when the fraud was just like literally ballots being found dumped in a dump and partially burned, and like the streets of Port-au-Prince, like in revolt over this like crass stuffing of ballots. Jean-Pierre Kingsley came out and said, yes, this is a good election, da da da. Okay, so this guy he did a whole bunch of things before that. I don't even remember them all, but I've written about him. But a whole bunch of things before that election. This is somebody who is not at all credible in my eyes on this kind of stuff. But anyways, in this piece in the Globe, he says, we are in a terrible mess in Canada. Foreign countries have dared to interfere in our system. Now, this is the really important part. The terrible mess. Okay, this is, yeah, we are, but let's climate crisis, let's housing, a few other things that are a little higher on the list. Then he goes on to what that invasion of our system has done is that it created doubt about the legitimacy of our system. Invasion. So now it's an invasion. We all knew this was what this was all about, right? it's all preparing the terrain to say China's invaded us. We have the right to invade them. I mean, that's what at a macro level. This is clearly what this whole foreign interference. Now he sort of used the actual word, uh, uh, and I think I kind of I salute him in one sense for doing that. But that's clearly where this has all been going, is going, and it's laying the groundwork for this containment of China policy, which at the most extreme may lead to a full-on war. Now, 24, 36 hours after Putin came out and said that the U.S. So while Starmer was going to Washington to meet with Biden about this push to have the British made, but I think Americans are involved somehow in the making. I think some in France maybe as well. These Storm Shadow missiles, I think they can go like 250 kilometers, maybe it's 250 miles even. Anyways, cutting edge missiles of that the Ukrainians want to be able to use inside of Russia. So blow up shit in Russia. They say they're just going to blow up military targets, but whatever. Okay. So Putin comes out and he says he says directly, this would mean NATO, US, European countries are at war with Russia. He's escalating what he sees this as, making clearly he sees this as a red line. 24 to 36 hours after, Trudeau comes out, really hard statement. We support this. We want the Ukrainians to have these weapons to blow up stuff in Russia. They have every right to do that. Da, 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 da. Okay, hard line comment from Trudeau. As Starmer and Biden are discussing it, it appears now Biden has said no. So basically Blinken wants this. Blinken is pushing. I think Blinken's Secretary of State wants this. The Pentagon is saying, whoa, 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 whoa. This is a big escalation, and it has limited tactical military utility. And maybe it's a bluff, but as a former British ambassador to the U.S., I believe, quoted in the Financial Times, says Putin is bluffing until he's no longer bluffing, right? So you keep crossing these red lines, and some major escalation happens. Probably not nuclear weapon, but blowing something up in a NATO country, or some pretty big act of sabotage that's very clearly Russia, but they have a degree of deniability. Apparently, some of that stuff's going on in Europe already. I actually believe that they may be hyping it, but I believe that makes a bit of sense to me, that Russia would start, as I've said previously, target military factories in Germany or what places that are delivering weapons to the Ukrainians. That just sort of makes sense. To the extent they can do it without being caught doing it. Anyway, so that Putin makes us, and Trudeau just goes down hard, right? And this is Trudeau, right? So again, fortunately, it looks like Biden has held off on this, and I think in a couple of weeks at the General Assembly, there's going to be most of the NATO countries, people are going to be together, and there'll be some other meeting where there'll be another push for this. But it's held off at the moment. But again, Justin Trudeau pushing, more aggressive, more escalation, and you have the reasonable people, or those in the Pentagon, who probably in part better understand the implications, and also they know that they're going to be the ones that are going to be sucked into more of a war. The Canada Files has a piece about the Canadian Congress fundraising for the Azov Battalion and recruiting Canadians. Now, on the left, I brought this up last week, and this whole business of these right-wingers, a couple of Canadians, but via the U.S., who've been indicted for their association with Russia, RT, Russians around creating this media. And so a bunch of left-wingers just picked this up as if it's truth. The Americans indicted it, and obviously these right-wingers, and they showed how all these right-wing Canadians have been behind different anti-immigrant stuff, denial of murdered at residential schools, all that kind of stuff. And so basically did this sort of use the geopolitics to attack the right. Now, Charlie Angus, the NDP MP, he says Remember when Pierre Poilievre and his conservative MPs stood up to vote against military funding for Ukraine? Why did we need CBS, US CBS, to tell us that Russian disinformation is pumping up Poilievre while trashing Trudeau? Putin knows his useful idiots. Okay, so Poilievre is Putin's useful idiot. Taylor Noakes, who's usually fairly good on Twitter, saying after journalists revealed far-right influencers were on the receiving end of Kremlin kickbacks, Pierre Poilievre cried havoc and let slip his dogs of war on Russian interference with our democracy. No, rather on Craig Sauvé, the NDP candidate in the by-election. I'll get to that whole question in a second. So he's using this, I agree with him on the conservative attacks against Craig Sauvé, but he's framing it all through the lens of this is all like understood. Obviously, the Russians are behind Poilievre and they're like, funding him and he's one of theirs and he's, he didn't want to go all in on, one vote. He's, a total staunch NATO proxy war person, but he's not. One point, I don't know if he was echoing some of the Trumpian base of the conservatives, what exact strategy was, but he didn't vote with at one point for more weapons to Ukraine. And so they're really riding him on that. On the issue, Ottawa Citizen had a story on the secret list of the 900 Nazi war criminals that the Deschênes report haven't been released. And of course, as we've talked about last week, I believe, Ukrainian Canadian Congress is suing, preparing to sue to block the names of these 900 former Nazis who came to Canada after World War II. And the Polish, some Ottawa Citizen stories about the Polish group calling for their release, and also the Ukrainian, I'm forgetting that news, progressive Ukrainian Canadians are calling for those documents to be released. So we'll see where that goes with the UCC and that whole question. Now, on the a couple of really extreme examples of the suppression on this issue. So the TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival, banned Russians at War, which is this anti-war. It's this documentary, Canadian-Russian documentary person. I haven't seen it, but she's very clearly says herself she's against the invasion, against Russian policy. But essentially, it's I guess it's an anti-war film, but it sort of it humanizes the Russian soldiers and sort of says that the whole variation of they were lied to, they believe some lies, to just the sort of like how horrible it is to be at the front, to how they just the different ways they ended up there, financial reasons, this and that, and I guess it's mostly about the sort of individual, so humanize them. And there's a huge campaign to have it shut down from TIFF. Now, it was initially funded by, in part, it's the French government, French media, whatever, funded part of it, and I think TV Ontario funded some of it. And it showed, I guess, in Venice at the Venice Film Festival 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, or not long ago. And it was supposed to show at TIFF, a huge campaign, Ukrainian Canadian Congress, boom, MPs. And then Chrystia Freeland comes out, says this shouldn't be shown. And TIFF shuts it down. TV Ontario, which I think funded a chunk of it and was planning on showing it, they've censored it. And this is not just, like, this is state involvement. I mean, really, this is, state effort to censor this film. And again, it's an anti-war film. It's against Russia's invasion, but it's just not, like, it just says it's not even, I don't think, at a geopolitical level, but at a personal level, sort of, it says it's not, there's Russians are human beings. as Chris Selly in the National Post, his column kind of basically that he watched it. He said it's a mediocre documentary, but it's basically it just says makes Russians as human beings. So this is a pretty hard censor. Now, simultaneously on Friday, they came out, State Department, Ottawa, and the British all came out basically saying RT is not just part of Russian propaganda, which it is, of course. It's, an important part of Russia's global propaganda system, just like Al Jazeera is for Qatar, just like DW is for Germany, just like Press TV is for Iran, just like France 24 is for the French. I'm missing some, I'm sure I'm forgetting a few of the TRT, BBC International, there's different kind of dynamics. You had Radio Canada International, that was Canada's that was more radio. These are parts of states propaganda apparatus. I mean, I don't think that there's any, that's very clear cut with RT. I think it's a from the Russian perspective, it's very successful. And so the part of what was stated in this thing, in the statement by Joly and from the Secretary of State Blinken, part of it, it makes like I believe, which is that the RT is set up a whole bunch of these other like Africa focused ones. It used to be called Redfish. I saw it on Twitter. Did lots of good sort of tweet memes and stuff. I got lots of following now. That got kind of banned, I guess, and then they've set up another one. That makes total sense to me, right? The idea that the Russian state is either directly asking RT or the RT and internally in knowing what the Russian state wants is setting up these other kind of media entities that aren't just direct RT, but kind of serve part of these bigger purposes. That all makes sense to me. But what they're saying now is that it's a tool of interference, and obviously any media outlet is a tool of interference in a sense. So that's obviously true in one sense, but not really what is conjured up when we talk about foreign meddling. But then it goes on to say, and Joly says that basically that RT is involved in a cyber incident that harmed critical infrastructure. So they're basically saying that RT is involved in espionage, but also like sabotage espionage. And that is very hard for me to believe. It just doesn't, on the surface of it, it doesn't make sense to me because the Russian state has different ways of doing that, other entities that are responsible for that. And if you consider RT a success in the propaganda field, why would the Russian state want to then divert it into a terrain that is really enabling the undermining of its propaganda stuff and being, targeted? So that makes I'm very skeptical that RT is involved in like a cyber incident that hurt critical infrastructure. Now, the wording of the press release sort of suggests that there's Russian hackers that may have been involved in a cyber incident that hurt critical infrastructure, and that they may have hacked something and then released some of that information to RT. The language is a little bit like sort of vague on this. That makes more sense to me, right? And that RT has been the beneficiary of just like WikiLeaks was, just like different New York Times has been, the Pentagon Papers, endless. The Globe and Mail is regularly leaks of different internal documents that get okay. So it's a little bit the language clear, but they're basically setting up, and it's very. There's a quote in a CBC article about it that was actually from a week earlier. I hadn't seen from when there was the RT officials being indicted by the U.S. Attorney General, and it's a very menacing quote from Dominique Leblanc, who's the Canadian security minister, and really like threatening that anyone who has anything to do with RT basically can find themselves in jail. I mean, that's essentially where they're going with it. So that's I think all part, and when in the language they talk about disinformation. So Leblanc's quote is about disinformation, anybody who engaged in disinformation. But we know the Canadian government considers saying that NATO expansion contributed to provoking the invasion. That's considered disinformation. There's a whole bunch of things that, in my opinion, are just statements of fact that the Canadian government has previously suggested are disinformation. So that line and all this stuff is very tricky. I don't think the Canadian government at this point would try to push, chucking someone like maybe myself in jail for disinformation because I went on RT and said that the NATO expansion was contributing to provoking the Russian invasion. But I think that you can see a situation down the road where that dynamic does seem more and more plausible. But the big picture here is Justin Trudeau is going after, doubling down on escalation in the proxy war. Simultaneously, we're banning films that humanize Russian soldiers, and we're saying that the RT, the Russian media outlet, is meddling in Canada, foreign interference all around the world. It's involved in cyber incidents and attacking Canadian infrastructure. And basically, it should be shunned, it should be shut down, it should be whatever. So we're still 2.5 years into this full-on proxy war. We're in this climate of still significant kind of repression, McCarthyite, if you like, kind of climate. And as Davide Mestrice pointed out, as TIFF cancels independent-funded Russians at War film, TIFF allows screening of Israeli state government-funded film. So they didn't shut down the film that is whitewashing funded by the Israeli state, and but they do this other one that's not funded by the Russian state. Anyway, so that's our climate, and this this is obviously taking place amidst the genocide, the Holocaust in Gaza. I saw a story that's really crazy. I didn't really delve into it, but apparently there's examples of children in Gaza's hair graying, and they're suggesting it's because of all the shock and trauma. That's a pretty, if this is true, I don't know if it's true or not, but if it is, I mean, among the thousand and other grim statistics or storylines coming out of Gaza, that's a disturbing one. Radio Canada reported on that the Canadian government's travel advisory for the West Bank is basically saying that the Israelis are racists. They'll throw you in jail if you post political messages on Twitter. So if you're in the West Bank and if you're Palestinian or if you're Arab, don't post anything to Twitter that criticizes Israeli human rights violations, because they're brutal occupiers. Essentially, that's what the travel advisory says. One hand, the Canadian government says that, and then on the other hand, of course, the Canadian government doesn't say that. Melanie Joly this week announced the suspension of 30 arms permits, and she made a comment that she's saying that the 50,000 mortars that General Dynamics in here in Montreal, Repentigny, just outside of Montreal, are going to be sending to Israel via the U.S. $83 million contract, that she sort of suggests she's against it and they might need a permit. This is going to be, there's lots and lots and lots of wiggle room here. And she didn't say anything. She didn't say it was going to be stopped. She didn't say that Canadian arms exports to Israel are going to be ended. She didn't say Canada has a responsibility on the arms trade treaty to stop this stuff. But she did sort of hint in some of that direction. It's a little unclear on some of what's going to play out exactly with this. General Dynamics has their own ways of kind of internally sourcing these mortars. Maybe the Canadian government, the Canadian plant ships mortars that are just used by the American military, and then they have mortars at a facility in the U.S. are then used in the shipment to Israel. I don't know how General Dynamics will do that. I certainly know that the Canadian government is not on the cusp of ending the defense production sharing arrangement, which allows the weapons to go to Israel, go to the U.S. without permits, arms permits. That's what would be needed, I think, in this. They're certainly not in a position where they're about to do that, and they don't even talk about that issue, though we should be talking about that. CIJA came out right away when this was announced, and they said they were meeting with the U.S. ambassador to basically encourage the U.S. ambassador to pressure Ottawa or bully Ottawa against restricting General Dynamics facility in Montreal from providing these weapons to Israel. So you have this lobbyist for a foreign government announcing to their email list that they are meeting with the representative of a foreign state in Canada to pressure the Canadian government against this move to restrict these high explosives going to the Israeli military to kill people in Gaza. This is CIJA for you. And there's a story in The Breach about Canadian Ottawa company Gas Stops, which has sole sources. According to the story, there's 100 Canadian companies that provide arms for the F-35, but this is the only Canadian company that provides this specific component, which I'm now completely blanking on what that specific component is. But apparently all the F-35s have that component from this Ottawa company, Gas Stops. And so that's, of course, a certain amount of leverage over the whole production of the F-35. And all of this, of course, falls under the Defense Production Sharing Arrangement. So we don't even have the permit, they don't provide permits and all this kind of stuff. But this is a potential campaign leverage point that is an interesting one. And the story talks about in the Netherlands, this is one of their companies that does their sole source supplier for the F-35. There's been an effort to go at that supplier for the same kind of reason because of that kind of vulnerability. And that's a worthwhile story to take a look at. Now, on the fascism, the Zionist fascism front that we talked about many times, Haaretz had this piece titled Jewish far-right extremists linked to outlawed terror group show up at pro-Palestinian events in Toronto. You would never get a headline like that in a Toronto Canadian media outlet. And they talk about the JDL being on U of T campus about a week ago, 10 days ago, that Heret Canada, that slogan, I don't have it in front of me. It's one, never again, Jews with guns. Oh, fortunately, I don't think I have the full slogan here, but you can look at it online, Heret Canada. Jews can shoot, Jews can shoot, I think is the other part of their patch. Anyways, it's a fascistic group. They were mobilized at U of T. I think I talked about it last week. Haaretz reported on it, and the university's Muslim Student Associations held a press conference. As far as I know, the Canadian media didn't report on it, except for Canadian Jewish News, which did this sort of whitewashing of these three. There's also this J-Force, this private security company that apparently is set up now to protect Israel events and Israel dignitaries and Israel protests. And they were also at U of T 10 days ago. And the Canadian Jewish News just whitewashed it, and none of the Canadian media reported on it until about a week later. The Muslim Students Association hosted a press conference, and I saw a couple media outlets there. I don't know if they actually covered it. There's also the Hillel at York brought former IDF soldier on campus to teach Israeli combat tactics. What's it called? Krav Maga. So this is what they're doing. This is what Hillel York is doing, bringing former Israeli soldiers on to create these vigilante kind of type of groups. And of course, it's all framed under defensiveness. Jews are under attack, kind of framing of all this, just as the Jewish Defense League, right? It's always the Defense League as these fascists plot to blow up Palestine House. And apparently, what RCMP investigated JDL for back in 2011. There was a whole bunch of arrests in Toronto of Palestine people. It seems like the Toronto police are escalating. And then there's some pretty horrible video. There was a jail support at Station 51, police station in Toronto. And then the police basically came out and attacked the police support. And there's image of this cop just smashing this woman in the face. Apparently her jaw was broken. And apparently someone else's was sent to hospital. And then they arrested 7 people. So the cops come out. They attack the people there for the police support. They arrest 7 people. Apparently, they only end up charging 3 of them. Of course, it was the police that were the violent people who should have been arrested and should have been charged. But that's not the world that we live in. And people like Anthony Housefather, like they jump up and down. All these Zionists jumping up and down. Yes, great stuff, great stuff. Celebrating the arrest. They celebrated the arrest of Samar Al-Dukur, who's the mother here in Montreal, whose 13-year-old was killed in Gaza, who's been protesting Mark Miller. They celebrated that. They celebrate these attacks against the police brutality in Toronto. Anthony Housefather jumps in and he basically says that Meridian Hall, the theater downtown Toronto, he calls it The constant targeting of Jewish communities at our own community buildings. So the Zionist organization, United Jewish Appeal, the most important Zionist organization, had Barry Weiss, some Israeli soldiers, singers perform and stuff like that. And there was a big protest. And he says that it's targeting the at Jewish community buildings. So even downtown, like Toronto theaters, have now become no protest zones because they're Jewish community buildings. It may be owned by a Jewish person or not. I don't know. But this is what Housefather is jumping in. Honest Reporting Canada is apparently sent out an email saying they're trying to launch a canary mission, equivalent of a canary mission in Canada. That's about like sort of doxing or outing people, historically mostly about students who opposed apartheid and trying to wreck their ability to get jobs. That's the like stated mission, and apparently Honest Reporting Canada is setting this up in Canada. One post said Honest Reporting Canada is a charity. I'm not sure if it is a registered charity or not. I think it might not be, but I think it has an like associated arm that is. That's something worth looking into. Just that makes it even more egregious. And in this announcement, they say that the aim here is to restore deterrence and procure consequences against our adversaries. So they're pretty, got to restore deterrence, consequences against our adversaries. They're pretty open about what their aim is. The Toronto Star had a story about a Toronto teacher who was fired and is now suing the school for wrongful termination because she showed a video back quite a few months ago, but then she posted something on Instagram, I believe, whatever. It's just some pro-Palestinian statement, and then she got brought in, and the whole business, she's anti-Jewish, whatever business, and then she got terminated. She's suing, so it's one more of these examples. There's a story about the University of Windsor. So University of Windsor comes up with a good agreement with its student encampment, and then the Jewish pro-Israel donors withdraw their money, and so the University of Windsor. The headline was controversial deal with anti-Israel protesters has big donors deserting University of Windsor, and that Zeckelman, he's a Canadian American steel one of the biggest steel companies he owns. His dad died when he was young. He was like 19, and he became the head of that. He was involved in some controversy, funding Donald Trump, I believe it was, something about that. I forget this was donating. Yeah, he was donating to Trump, and because he was Canadian, I think there was some bit of a controversy over some of that. So he's withdrawn $1 million. And as Davide Mastrici pointed out, saying that the university administrations are vowing to donors, that is, in some contexts, they will accuse you of anti-Semitism to say that. But here we have this like really clear example of these like prominent Jewish donors who are publicly announcing the withdrawing of money to University of Windsor because of this agreement they made. B'nai B'rith, Ottawa Citizen or Montreal Gazette has a story about B'nai B'rith pitches anti-Semitism policy to Quebec government, and lo and behold, opposition explicitly, they say, opposition to Zionism, when it denies the Jewish people's right to a homeland, constitutes anti-Semitism. They also say that in this thing, that suggesting that there's another indigenous people is anti-Semitism. So saying that essentially saying Palestinians are indigenous is anti-Semitism. So the Israeli or the Jewish claimed goes back like 12 empires, 2,500 years. That's to say that that's not the sole indigenous claim to Palestine. That's anti-Semitism. Deborah Lyons is a pushback by Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. Deborah Lyons, special envoy on Holocaust promotion. She has a new guide to pressure or how to apply the IHRA definition of anti-Palestinian definition of anti-Semitism. And that's being pushed, and there's a pushback on that, as people should support CJPME's thing on that. Now, I've gone on too long, like I've been doing way too often, but a couple comments on the Islamophobia special representative. So there's a real kerfuffle against, I'm forgetting her first name, El Jawabi. So it blew up in the Quebec media. So 2 weeks ago, August 30th, apparently, she sends this letter to all the universities and I guess to the CEGEPs, the Quebec colleges, maybe all the colleges as well across country, saying that basically pushing back against this, the saying that pro-Palestinian activism is anti-Jewish, and saying that basically Palestinian, Arab, Muslim students are feeling targeted on campus as well by all this suppression. And it's kind of a response to Deborah Lyons, kind of response, of course, to Housefather and his big push. And I guess in this thing, which didn't get much attention, mostly because it was like the English media just wanted to suppress it because it was saying it's not just anti-Semitism on campus, but there's anti-Palestinian racism and whatnot. So it basically gets no attention. It gets picked up by like Palestine kind of Solidarity World and National Council Came Muslims is sort of talked about for like a week. Then the Quebec media gets a hold of it. And I guess in this, she suggests that it would be helpful to hire more Muslim teachers or officials as pushing back against anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, and anti-Muslim. So she's it's mostly a Palestine issue. But the Quebec media takes it and they frame it in their hatred of Muslims angle and hatred of her specifically, because she was involved in saying that Bill 21, the reasonable accommodation thing, is anti-Muslim. And so when she got appointed, it was a huge backlash in Quebec, kind of francophone nationalist kind of milieu. And a whole bunch of called for her to be, she had to apologize. And so they take this whole angle, which is really, I think, tangential to the point that was being pushed, which was the anti-Palestinian question. And they take up this as Journal de Montréal said, la foi comme critère d'embauche. So religion like a criteria for hiring. And so then they whip this up, and it's like the Muslims are taking over. We got to hire the Muslims, and this is the Muslim representatives calling for the hiring of the Muslims. And they mostly just drop the Palestine element to it, because it's really fascinating to see this within Quebec, because Quebec's still the surveys still show it's the most pro-Palestinian area, but it's also the most anti-Muslim. So it's caught in this kind of dynamic, and CEJA, of course, jumps in on it. They call for her to be she should be fired, and they say they've been calling for this a long time. So CEJA is loving this. They pick up on this sort of Quebec nationalist anti-Muslim. Part of it is a little bit more legitimate. I would say part of it is a little bit more of an anti-religious thing that I have more sympathy for. It's a little bit complicated. I don't want to get into that whole question, but and so they pick up on that. Now, I'll just say quickly, our good friend Jeremy Levy, the mayor of the Israeli municipality of Hampstead, as he seems to believe on his Twitter, he decided to have a sit down with the Mossab Hassan Youssef, who was I guess he's like the son of some prominent Hamas official. And he's now like basically anti-Hamas, anti-Palestinian, whatever, anti-Muslim kind of guy. And so Levy's talking about it, and Levy talks about the Craig Sauvé, the by-election, which I'll get to in 1 second. And this guy, so somebody posts on Twitter, this guy Mossab Hassan Youssef that Levy is boasting about, and this great guy, and knows that Craig Sauvé's anti-genocide leaflet is a terrible thing. Well, what this guy posted just like 3 days before Levy meets with him, he says, Islamic symbols in non-Islamic countries should be demolished without hesitation. Islam is a virus. Infected individuals must be quarantined in the Hijaz desert until they heal or die. So this is the guy that Jeremy Levy's meeting with. I mean, it's like, can you imagine if someone's, the mayor of some Canadian municipality met with somebody, said that about Jewish people or any other people? But of course, there's no comment. And so yeah, they bring up the Craig Sauvé thing. So the by-election, I'll end on that. The by-election is right now, today. We'll know the results at the end of the day. I think it's a big deal. Obviously, I hope Craig Sauvé wins. It's a real three-way race between the bloc, between NDP and the Liberal. If the bloc wins, that's okay. It's not good because Craig Sauvé because he put out this I vote for Craig Sauvé's a vote against genocide leaflet that caused a big kerfuffle. There's a fair bit there. There's also it's interesting to see a bit of the background of how this came to be. There's been a picket. I didn't actually know this, that there's been a rally in front of Laura Palestini, who's a liberal candidate's office, for basically a month, every day for multiple hours. They have Palestinian flags, they play music, and they basically making her life difficult. And there was months ago, right at the start, there was this postering campaign in the riding. There's also been some leafleting, like people like Laurel Thompson, who's a friend of our show, has been leafleting in the riding. So there's been thousands. Paju has been leafleting in the riding. So the Palestine question has now entered the race. Jagmeet Singh made his best comment, I'd say, ever, as far as I know, on this question, in response to a question during the Montreal caucus of was it on Tuesday or Wednesday here in Montreal? He got asked about Sauvé. First of all, they defended the Sauvé thing right away, but then he got asked about it again, and he showed you what they have skilled people in that office, right? Like he gets asked basically what seems like a hostile question, is that this whole business about having a Palestinian flag on a leaflet for become a federal MP, and this whole is anti-Canadian kind of angle story. And Singh framing his response in that Canadian nationalist term, not my preferred way of doing it, of course, but in terms of neutering the criticism, does a brilliant job, which he basically says there's nothing more Canadian than defending international peace and human rights. I mean, it's not true, but in terms of the mythology and business of Canadian ideology, of course, it's the perfect way to answer that question. And then he goes on and talks about the genocide. It's very clear about the genocide, and then very clear that the conservatives are even worse on this issue. And then he goes and answers the question in French. And it's really important that how he does this too. Ended up watching this live. Is he clearly goes out of his way, makes very clear to refer to as a genocide, both in English and French. So this was clearly pre-planned by Singh. He wanted to use the word genocide. As far as I know, this was the first time that he stated clearly this is a genocide. I asked him actually about it about 2 months ago, and he said he were waiting on the ICJ ruling. And so he sort of hinted, maybe we think so, but he didn't, so a bunch of the MPs have been saying that, but I don't believe Singh had said it. And clearly does it in both languages, wants to say that. And that's exactly how it gets picked up in mostly in French media. Le Devoir runs it really prominent, and a bunch of others online. And we did that campaign. We got about 1,000 emails about the Defend Sauvé and call on NDP to double down. So maybe it contributed a little bit around Singh to all the caucus. So I think it may have contributed a little bit. Clearly, there's all these broader dynamics going on here. And so that's a little bit of a victory. And I think I've gone on way too long. I think I'll leave it at that, and I will make Laura a co-host. And yeah, if anyone has any comments, questions, I'd like to get out in not too long because I do have something I should get to. But yeah, if anyone has comments or questions, go ahead. But if there's none, then that's also totally fine. I'm not seeing anyone. I'm trying to get. I'm being blocked from. Weird. Okay, your co-host now. Go ahead.
Ifo, can you unmute, please?
All right. Quick question. Someone just posted to me privately on Facebook that they had noticed that I think it was the Ukrainian Congress or something, had threatened that they were going to sue the Canadian government if they released the documents.
Yeah,
I
they're fundraising for
popped
that.
in late, so I'm not sure if that was mentioned or if you know if that's actually real or not.
Yeah, oh, it's definitely real. There's been a bunch of stories about it. I think mentioned it last week. They're fundraising for it. They're trying to raise $150,000, and they've like they haven't. Well, it's now public because it's been reported on Auto Citizen Globe, but they were sending fundraising appeal to their list or whatever. Yeah.
All right, and then also there's been a lot of talk about immigration. and all this other stuff. It's my understanding that the one of the largest numbers of refugees that came to Canada in recent times have been Ukrainians, but yet the media portrayal of who they're trying to prevent from coming doesn't seem to be Ukrainians. They seem to be targeting black and brown as the scapegoat of the immigration problem. Now, to be clear, I don't think that immigrants are responsible for the housing crisis. That's clearly capitalism. But it's really interesting that they would ignore the largest number of 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 uh, of asylum claims that were accepted, and there was no blowback. But here in Nova Scotia and also in New Brunswick, they're complaining about if the federal government is going to ask them to settle immigrants, but they didn't complain so much about Ukrainians. I was wondering if you're getting any national coverage of that angle. Thank you.
Yeah, and my understanding, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but my understanding is by a large margin. It's like 300,000 Ukrainians have come, and they allowed for, like, I think at least twice that. They or twice that even applied, I believe. And there's still some, I don't know all the specifics, but basically there's lots of difficulties, difficult comes, all kinds of different dynamics. But so 300,000, I believe, are in Canada, and there's still sort of like a pool of a comparable number. I think it's maybe now a bit less than that, that are like sort of eligible to come at any point kind of dynamic. Someone else probably knows more about this than that. I don't remember like the Syrian. The only other kind of like big one that I can remember recently is the Syrian, but the number I have in my head for the Syrian is more like at the 25 to 50,000 range. So the Ukrainian is like many more than that. Now somebody else can check those numbers. I'm sure it's pretty easy to find that out. So it's not even like, comparable. Ukrainians by a large margin, and of course, as you point out, that's not the sort of the framing and all of the kind of like rising anti-immigrant type of rhetoric is like, certainly not. The Ukrainians are not really the blonde haired Ukrainians are not the what's kind of being put out there as the backlash target.
Alan, go ahead.
Uh, yes, just there's been these claims of that the West is getting tired of this war in Ukraine, but myself, I don't see that coming to an end very speedily, because someone sent me, it probably was pulled off of YouTube someplace, I don't recall for sure, but that indicated that Ukraine has one of the larger deposits of a whole variety of rare minerals compared to other countries of Europe. And the figure that was tossed out was in the area of $26 trillion. So go figure why Justin Trudeau is coming off with the information, or stating he wants to see these further range missiles from the West go to Ukraine so they can bomb further into Russia. And anyways, you could see where that's going.
Yeah, I think that the dynamic that's playing out in part is that Russia's winning, and it's becoming increasingly clear. They are advancing at the speed at which they're advancing in the Donbass is picking up, and the Kursk business is a bit of a sideshow that seems to be increasingly turning into a disaster for the Ukrainians. It doesn't matter much. It doesn't have much strategic value, and they're going to end up having a whole bunch of their forces killed in that. So there's a dynamic of escalate, right? But there's also a dynamic like Scholz, the German chancellor, said that there should be, he did very bad in the regional elections. And both the kind of like what's framed as the far right and the far left, a big part of their issue is criticizing the NATO proxy war and the increased cost of energy, the material and other stuff that's been sent. There aren't, particularly in the east of Germany, they're not necessarily totally hostile to Russia. So Scholz was calling for the Russians to be at the next peace negotiation. So that's happening at one level, and then simultaneously there's a sort of effort to escalate, and there's a sort of a degree of panic. I don't know much, about military affairs, but I was listening to I forget who it was, but I think it was making a pretty compelling case that these storm shadows, they might be useful to Ukrainians, but even if they were given, first of all, basically it would be British that would have to be launching them. They're not like they can be given to the Ukrainians, but there'll be still British involvement in the targeting and all this kind of stuff. So there really is, when Putin says that we'll be at war, like, I mean, where that line is and all these things is a bit unclear, and there's lots of things that we're doing that can make argument that we're already at war with Russia, but there would be direct British involvement in the targeting of the missiles. But the point was basically that it wouldn't have much strategic. It would have a little bit of benefit to the Ukrainians. It would force the Russians to move some things, I guess, further back, some weapon depots and stuff like that. But it wouldn't fundamentally change the dynamic on the battlefield. But it would be this sort of escalatory kind of dimension to it. So it's kind of like maybe Putin's bluffing, but maybe not. And so my sense is that Ukrainians are definitely losing. I didn't have a chance to watch it, but there's a interview that I think Dmitry Laskaris did with Radakai Desai and Michael Hudson. I believe it's Michael Hudson. And I think the headline or the kind of pullout was the U.S. has already won the war, Europe's lost, and Russia's turned eastward or something. I mean, it wasn't quite that, but basically, the U.S. has already won because they have fully subordinated Europe to its kind of policy. It's benefited NATO. Ukraine, of course, has lost. Russia's done okay by turning different relationships. And I think there's a good degree of truth. The Ukraine's obviously the big loser, but Europe has very much further subordinated itself to the U.S. And so the U.S. has really succeeded. Now, are the more sort of sensible people in the U.S. empire, they see that and they say, hey, let's just try to keep this running. Let's not escalate it further. We don't want nuclear war. That isn't good. That's not good for capitalism. That's not good for anyone. We don't even want a more generalized war, more like sabotage or whatever going on, and more in Eastern or Western Europe. We're kind of happy with where things are at. We don't want Ukraine to lose. We don't want them to collapse. So we do want to keep providing weapons to ensure that doesn't happen. But we've basically done well by this situation. Let's just keep it going, for years if need be. The military companies are happy. So this is not. I think that's kind of some of the dynamic, and I think how Canada's played it, where Canada's fit into all this, is Canada has very little downside. There's not, we're not having a big problem with energy costs because of this. We didn't have many Russian assets. Canadian companies didn't own that much in Russia. There's not much of a loss on that economic front. We are big players in the U.S. arms industry, so that's good for us. We're a member of NATO. We're into all that. That's all good for us. So we can be really bombastic, and we can push, harder line positions than Biden is ostensibly on board for. And that's kind of the the Canadian dynamic in all this. And then, of course, you got some domestic things, Ukrainian Canadian Congress and people like Christian Freeland and stuff like that. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it, Eve. We'll let you go to whatever you're going to.
Thank you guys. See
Thanks,
you.
thanks
Take care.
everyone.
Take care.